Hi everyone, coming to you live from Denver, Colorado, and I've got some really interesting stuff to talk about today. I'm going to try to adjust my camera just a little bit to see if I can get a better angle here, but oh well, might have to just live with it. You get to see a lot of the bricks above my head today. At any rate, I'm going to take, and hi Jenny and hi Mark, always great to see you both. I'm going to take just a moment, as I always do, to share this on my personal page. And then we will jump right in. And one of the things I'm going to be doing today is I'm trying to actually tighten up my format a little bit and get these videos down to about 12 to 15 minutes. I'd been typically hitting closer to 20, so this is my goal today, and I don't know if I'm going to hit it, but I'm always looking to improve and give you the best possible experience for the time. We all have limited time, so I want to make sure that everything I bring to you is valuable as it can be. So let me quickly finish this share. All right, there we go, and off it goes. Okay, I think everybody watching this pretty much knows who I am, but a quick introduction. I am a cultural innovator. I help companies elevate their culture, define their culture, and then create regular best practices around ways to keep that culture healthy, innovative, creative. This, in turn, has a drastic impact on the bottom line. People are more loyal, they're more productive, they're more creative. So I love what I do, and I take small principles from various cultural innovation and organizational and social psychology concepts and bring them to you here every week in small bite-sized doses that hopefully you find useful in your day-to-day life. This month's theme, I've just recently started going month by month with a general theme, is all about rewards and motivation. I talked a bit about positive reinforcement in previous episodes and a few other topics related to the types of things, intrinsic motivation, the types of things that truly motivate us at a deep humanistic level. Today I'm flipping that a little bit, just a little, and talking about negative reinforcement and punishment. I'm going to get out my whip today. No, I think I left that in the other room. Anyways, so negative reinforcement, punishment, and then talk to you about a couple sort of, I don't want to say crazy, but innovative and wild sociological things that China's got going on, where they're using some of these concepts in a broad sense to essentially manipulate their population into desired behaviors. And I would love to hear your opinions, whether that be in the comments or speaking up or scheduling a private chat with me about how you feel around these topics, because these can be highly controversial and kind of scary, because we're going to be looking into the future a little bit, like the Scooby-Doo. Okay, so first a quick overview. What is the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment? Generally speaking, negative reinforcement is when something is subtracted or removed from a situation that encourages a particular behavior. And punishment, so I'll give you some examples of these and go over it. Punishment is when you're adding to the situation to weaken a behavior. So that sounds a little bit vague at the moment. Bear with me. Negative reinforcement, something subtracted to encourage a behavior. So for example, I have very fair skin. You put me out in the sun and within a few minutes I turn into a tomato. It is not pretty, not a good look. The best outcome is that I get my freckles come out. But overall, for me, sun exposure is particularly harmful. That is a negative stimuli. That's something I don't enjoy, I don't want to happen, so therefore the behavior that drives in me is putting on sunscreen. I don't particularly enjoy putting on sunscreen. I'm not going to, it's not enhancing my skin or making me smell or look particularly lovely, although there's that coconut flavor that's kind of reminds me of childhoods near the beach. But at any rate, that's an example. The consequence is something I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to avoid getting burned, so therefore I will put on sunscreen. I don't get rewarded for putting on sunscreen. What gets subtracted from that equation is the sunburn. So I don't get punished per se for my behavior, but if I don't put on the sunscreen, something unfortunate will happen. Another example is when you leave for work. If you're someone who lives in an area that has rush hour, that has traffic jams, probably you don't enjoy that. Most likely you want to avoid driving in that creeping stop and go traffic, and people are frustrated, and if anyone out there actually enjoys rush hour and sitting in traffic jams, I would like to meet you, because I want to know what's going on with that, because that's one of those things where I personally just feel the life being sucked out of me when I'm creeping along in traffic, and inevitably I end up needing to pee before the end of it too, and then there's that drama. So I digress. Then that is negative reinforcement. I don't want to be in that situation. Therefore, the behavior it drives in me is finding a job with flexible hours, leaving super early, leaving super late, whatever that solution is. It's because I'm working out of avoidance of that situation. Even when my clothes get a little too tight and I want to lose some weight, that's the other thing. I'm not being punished, but I don't enjoy that feeling of my pants being too tight, and therefore that's driving other behaviors because I want to minimize my exposure to that particular situation. Hopefully this is enough examples of the idea of negative reinforcement. Again, not punishment. Some attributes of negative reinforcement that are important to be aware of is it's most useful when there's an immediate correlation. I recognize there's a direct link between whether I wear sunscreen and get sunburned if I go outside. There's a pretty immediate repercussion if I don't put on the sunscreen and I'm outside within a few hours. So it doesn't really help, and that's why in some instances the example of losing weight is very difficult, because there isn't quite as an immediate, like if I skip breakfast, all of a sudden my pants are not going to be loose and fitting and everything. So that's where sometimes the challenge does come in, is it's most effective when you can have a pretty short time between the experience that you want to alleviate and the desired behavior that helps alleviate that circumstance. So it guides your behavior towards certain actions, but doesn't necessarily reward behavior, but it moves you in that direction. It's also most effective when balanced with positive and other forms of reinforcement. So I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end. Punishment, however, is adding to a situation to weaken a behavior. So what do I mean by this? Well, this is where I want to talk about China a little bit. China has just recently started to implement a program where every citizen, I think it's over the age of 16, thereabouts, has to get a national ID card. They've put in place massive amounts of artificial intelligence-based surveillance. These systems, these cameras, can recognize who you are, even if you're wearing a wig or sunglasses or lots of makeup. It can identify the clothing you're wearing. It will say, hey, this is a female of such and such age wearing a gray dress and red shoes. These cameras are very accurate at determining who you are and quickly sending that information into their national ID infrastructure database. And then the idea being, if you are doing something undesirable, and that could be as simple as jaywalking or spitting your gum on the ground, you can imagine all kinds of social infractions. One of the examples is specifically for the jaywalker, there may be a screen at the intersection that then puts your face up for the entire society to see in that area and says, hey, Aymii just jaywalked. What a horrible person. It kind of shames you. And this is an example of punishment. I am adding something to the situation, to the circumstances. I now have added an element of shame in putting my picture up there, and that will hopefully weaken the behavior, which is jaywalking. So they're not really saying exactly what I should be doing. Does that mean I should be hanging out in the park instead, or driving a car? But they are specifically saying if you walk across the street against the light, you will be shamed. And where the system is going in the big picture, and they're hoping to have much of this implemented by 2020. So we're talking in the next couple of years. It sounds super futuristic, but you will create a social profile in the system by your actions, and this is something they're also looking at putting in people's homes, because a lot of the apartments in China are government funded. So in government housing, they also have monitors on the doorways and who's coming in and out, and how often you bring guests, and how many guests you bring, and which guests you bring, and so on, and what kind of records do those guests have, and with the police or with their social credit and stuff. So there's this massive social surveillance project underway in China. And the reason I'm so fascinated by this is twofold. Number one, the fact that this technology exists and has advanced so far that essentially it's very difficult, if I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult to avoid it. It's, like I said, it's recognizing your face, eventually your movements, and all sorts of pinpointed physiological attributes about you. It notices how long you have been in a particular location. So especially if there's a large gathering coming up and they want to assess, hey, this one person's been lurking around in these particular spots in a perimeter, it will kind of develop a heat map of people's behavior even in that particular social setting. Lots of interesting technology, and I encourage you to Google it if you're interested in learning more. Look up Chinese social score or China's social surveillance program, something along those lines. You'll find this information. And thank you to Mark Strand for bringing this to my attention as a good example of a fine line between positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishments. And China is really putting all three of those elements into the system. So positive reinforcement, you have a good social score, you will have access to rewards. Maybe you can travel more easily, or you can get better seats at the hot restaurant, and all sorts of perks, if you will, social perks. Negative reinforcement, if your score isn't good enough, there are just certain things you're not going to be able to do. And then punishment, you just did something we're not happy with, we're going to let the world know and shame you and have negative repercussions for that. So there's nothing that would technically, legally prevent this from being done in the US either. But there are a lot of wonderful people right now doing good work around the Constitution and laws and stuff within the US to counteract some of these systematic elements of surveillance. And it's really fascinating to me because the technology on the one side is really freaking cool, but sociologically how it gets implemented and who gets to police it and who gets to decide how particular laws should be either negatively or positively reinforced or punished, that's a pretty significant question, because behind all of this data and surveillance and such are just other human beings like you and I wrestling with these complex systems and these difficult questions. So the more you can educate yourself and be aware of these influences on your life, the better we'll all be at kind of helping our society grow in ways that are hopefully healthy and positive for us as a community. So top 3 takeaways. This is something else I'm going to try to do every week, is keep my message a little more succinct and then kind of give you the highlights at the end. When reinforcements are used properly, they should be strengthening desired behavior. And that could be a positive or a negative reinforcement. You are actively strengthening a behavior, whereas punishments serve to weaken a behavior, but don't necessarily tell you what the desired behavior should be. If you choose to use negative reinforcement, and there's nothing wrong with that, but do it in a timely way. Let's see, well, I gave you the examples before, so that's enough of the examples. But yeah, so negative reinforcement, just make sure, if you've ever worked with animals, I used to do natural horsemanship, and with a horse, if it's trying to go eat the grass, you should just make it a little uncomfortable for it. You're not hitting it or punishing it, but it's a lot of effort to put my head down to try to reach the grass because you tighten the reins a little, and then as soon as the horse lifts its head, it's like, oh, that's much better. But it has to be very timely. You can't, pull the reins 5 minutes after the horse, like, oh, I didn't like it when you did that a few minutes ago. The horse will just, well, what are you doing that for? You're weird. So negative reinforcement, use it in a timely manner. And then whether you choose to use positive or negative reinforcement, how do you make that decision? A lot of it has to do on observing the people or person that you are trying to coach, encourage, change their behavior. It's sometimes a matter of what resonates best with that person, but it's also critical. Us as humans, we tend to very easily fall into expectations and routines. So if I'm always getting positive reinforcement, and we talked about this last week, I come to expect it. I expect my $5 for getting my dishes washed, and then it becomes a reward and not positive reinforcement. So you need to be very careful about not just simply rewarding behavior, but actually finding ways to positively reinforce it, whether that be compliments, recognition. Go watch last week's video if you want more ideas around that. So some combination of positive and negative is probably right for most people, and it may change on based on the situation, based on the person, how much they desire to do this behavior to begin with, what their motivations, their intrinsic motivations are at the get-go. So positive is more like a goal. That's exciting. It's something extra you get. Negative is more like a reminder, like, oh, maybe you don't want to do that. Oh, maybe these pants are getting a little tight and I need to make some changes. So you can sort of think about them in that way. Positive, more like a goal and an achievement. Negative, more like a reminder. Both of these can be used to avoid complacency, and that I expect to have the same reward every time, or the same impact every time. There's a whole different concept I'm not going into today called reinforcement scheduling, and there's different concepts. Do you reward things every single time? There's different models you use depending on whether this behavior is brand new or something you're looking to encourage long-term, something you're looking to just reinforce from time to time. So something you can look up if you're curious, reinforcement schedules, reinforcement scheduling. Thank you for joining me today. I always enjoy seeing you, and I really appreciate everybody who comes afterwards and watches the videos as well. If there's some area of your life that you'd like to speak with me about, if you're looking for extra motivation, ideas, how to get started on maybe a project or an endeavor that you would like to bring into your life, please schedule some time to chat with me. Would love to talk about it. I also do public speaking and consult with companies and individuals on their cultural and team and project type of motivations and productivity and culture. So I will be back this same time next week, and I will, as always, put a link in the comments to be able to schedule time with me or check out Ensoma's newly designed website, which I'm super excited about. I hope everyone has a great rest of your week and a great weekend. See you next week.